Now, 46% of the United States is presently in drought, and that is increasing. It's projected to increase. So yet again, we're going to be looking at more than half of the United States under drought. And a lot of this is severe drought. When I say 46, that's all drought, but a lot of that is severe. That reminds me, and I want to remind you, that the southwest of the United States is in a mega drought.
Hello, and welcome to another edition of the Climate Emergency Forum. I'm Herb Simmons. I'm author of A Climate Vocabulary of the Future, and I will be your host today. Those of you who watch regularly, and we hope more and more will have seen that we focused on Europe the last 2 weeks. We thought it was so important because the intensity of the heat was so pervasive that we couldn't cover it in one program. Well, today we're coming back to this side of the Atlantic, at least the side of the Atlantic that those of us on this call live, and we're going to focus on North America. And North America, though it may not have made as many headlines as Europe, is also suffering through an extraordinary early summer heat season with floods and all sorts of sort of calamities. And we can only wonder and be concerned about what that portends for the rest of this summer and the rest of this year. And so, as always, I want to ask you to like and subscribe to this program, to go to our website, climateemergencyforum.org. Donate if you can. We would really appreciate it. And take a look at our new podcast series. Thank you, Charles and Heidi, for that. And so we appreciate that. As always, stay till the end when I will do the Climate 3, three of the more important climate stories of the past week. And I guarantee each will be done in 1 minute or less. And so today's focus will be on what those of you who live in North America are either personally experiencing or have read about or maybe experienced last week or may experience this coming week. And that is an intensity of heat and everything that goes along with this. And as always, we have our regular panelists, Paul Beckwith and Dr. Peter Carter. Today, we will start with Paul. What's happening this summer in North America?
Yes, thank you, Herb. So I'm going to start from the global system and then zero into the nuts and bolts of what's been happening in my neck of the woods. So global system, I just want to repeat, I've said this previously, that a lot of the heat waves in Europe and in North America that have been happening are part of the overall system, with the jet streams having very powerful ridges over Europe and over North America. And then the trough of that jet stream is south of the global warming hole or cold blob in the Atlantic. And these patterns become persistent, kind of locked in place, so we get long duration events. And I think we're heading to more heat waves in Europe. It's going to be sort of happening. This is not going away. We're going to see lots of this over the next few months because the patterns are connected. So that's the large system view. And I've said it before, but it's very important for people to understand how the jet streams play this important role. Now, onto the nuts and bolts of Ottawa region. So we had a massive storm on July 1st, with some regions of Ottawa had over 8 inches of rain. At the airport, the official reading was about 4.5 inches or 111 millimeters of rain. Over 4,500 basements have been flooded. I just had coffee with a friend who's on a street where all the houses on one side of the street had 6 inches of water. And luckily on his side of the street, there was only, the basement was a bit damp. A lot of the problems was there was so much water that it caused backflow in the sewer system, and then the water came up through that location in the basement. And so today's garbage day, and basically the streets are loaded with carpet and drywall and all kinds of remnants from that flooding. Montreal had severe flooding as well. There's also extreme wind events. So I tracked the storm as it went through. It canceled all the events on Canada Day. There were a couple mini tornadoes reported near Kingston, Ontario. I went to a cottage this past weekend and the power was still out. that was on Saturday. So, the storm was on the Wednesday. So lots of trees brought down. I'd seen on Facebook, somebody was saying that their street got pummeled on a street just north of Sand Lake near Elgin, Ontario. So I investigated that on the Saturday night just passed. What I didn't know, it was a private road, but I went up it anyway, figuring I'm a storm expert. And I came across, massive tree fall blocking the road in this area. Based on the tree fall direction, I'm pretty sure it was a mini tornado there, which was not being reported by anywhere else. It's a private road. But if it was a downburst, the trees would all fall with the roots close to the center, pointing away from the center. If it was a derecho straight line winds, the trees would have all fallen in the same direction. But because it was a mini tornado, the trees were really severely damaged in the central area. And as you get to the outskirts of the tornado diameter, the trees were all falling sort of in the same circular direction. So, this has been unreported. So because it's a private road, I couldn't linger around too long, but somebody was taking drone footage. So based on a copy of the drone footage, I'll be contacting Western University. They have something called the Northern Tornado Project, and I'll be reporting the storm to them. And then it may make the news as being yet another tornado. But I'm sure these events were widespread across Ontario because there were lots of trees down. So this is the world we're in, where we can expect more and more of these types of events moving forward.
Oh boy, so this struck near to home. Maybe you've already done this, like allocate a higher percentage of your time to this activity, figure out what you're going to give up, because I know how committed you are to tracking these storms and analyzing them and seeing how they fit in the big picture.
Yeah, so I did go out storm chasing myself. I just thought of a funny story. When I first got the house that I'm in now, there was a big storm after we bought the house, and I went down the basement during the big storm, and water was actually coming through the walls. And I thought, holy crap, we got ripped off buying this house. But what I did is I created a French drain in my entire backyard. So I removed about 14 inches of soil. I put in very, very coarse rocks, and then finer rocks, and then something called stone dust. And then I covered it with flagstones. And this is a massive drain. Since that happened, I've had no issues with any water getting into my basement. So there is lots of different ideas. If your house was flooded with water this storm, I think it's very important to say, well, how can I prevent this if the same storm happens? And there are ways to prevent it, unless you're right along the river or you're in very low land. So there's lots of things that we can do. And, it's only a question of time before insurance companies get fed up and say, we can't afford to pay for all of these costs. If it's a sewer backup, you can get the city involved to get some money, or the provincial government or federal government. But if it's just insurance covered, premiums for everybody goes up from all these storms.
Thank you. And of course, that's true not just in Canada, but in large parts of the United States in terms of the insurance markets collapsing for a variety of reasons, and governments mostly kind of, I think it's fair to say, flailing around trying to figure out how to address it. Well, let's switch over from Ottawa to the western part of Canada, 3,000 miles or thereabouts. Peter, what's going on in your neck of the woods?
Well, a lot is going on in northern Canada again. I'm afraid I have to report. Northern Canada up into the boreal is ablaze right across Canada, from the Pacific to the Maritimes. And this has flared up in just the past week. It is absolutely shocking to look at it. And we have the satellites, we have NASA firms, so we can follow this. But you remember a couple of years ago, this is right across Canada. And the fires are solid. The big fires are solid. So we have 790 active fires in Canada again, and the fire season, of course, goes through to September. Every day we're getting 30 odd new fires added, and we have 1.2 million hectares burned this year up in northern Canada. And of course, that's part of the boreal forest carbon sink, so there's global ramifications of that. The United States, I'm trying to premise everything I say by reminding us that global warming is accelerating, right? We are in a completely different climate change situation than we thought we were, a year ago or 2 years ago. Everything's changed. I have been saying for years and years that the US is highly vulnerable to heat, and it's very clear it's highly vulnerable to drought as well. The point I'm making there is when I started getting into climate change, global warming, the conventional wisdom was that North America would ride things out. It would be bad for Africa, bad for the tropics. Well, of course, we know that's so wrong now. The United States, spring, we have the numbers in for the temperature there. Very, very hot, the second hottest. 4.9 degrees Fahrenheit above the 20th century average. So the temperatures are high, high, high. Now, I want to stress again that we see this, the media reports it, and we sort of get the opinion, oh, this is just this year and that's bad. No, no, it's year after year after year. So I am seeing the same thing. I'm putting together basically the same posts, except they're worse. This goes on to spring and summer, and all of these heat and drought extreme events in the United States, they're expanding. And we're getting heat dome after heat dome. So this year, Paul might know better than I, but I get the impression that this is another big change. I don't think we've had heat dome after heat dome after heat dome before. However, United States is going into another similar situation that I've seen before. The heat dome is going to spread from the southwest. It's going to spread into central, and then it's going to basically get, in a week's time, it's going to involve practically all of the United States. And that's not new. I remember that a year ago and a year before. And in the coming days, the American natives are going to be subjected to triple digit heat index, very, very dangerous degrees of humid heat. Right now, there are 27 million Americans under heat alerts. That kind of manna has been going on for weeks and weeks and weeks. Heat index, as I say, generally, right across America is going to be above 100 degrees Fahrenheit. So I just want to run through very quickly some sources for you, because with the climate denial and the powers of denial, we really need to know where our scientific sources are. Well, of course, we have world weather attribution, right? The headline on the recent heat wave in the US was that fossil fuels are increasing the dangerous heat in the United States in the past few decades. We have Climate US now. Climate.gov was trashed by the Trump administration. So the scientists have now got together, thank God, and they've replaced it with a site and a dashboard, which is just as good. It's Climate US. You can get the FISH National Climate Change Assessment there on that site. We still have good data from the EPA, by the way, so don't give up on the EPA. Climate Central is absolutely excellent on the United States. Climate Central. And then last, I found that Resources for the Future have a superb update on United States heat and one on United States drought. And those are 2026 publications.
Thank you, Peter, and thanks for that useful information for our viewers on sources. I want to add another one that's very important, at least for those. I think this is an app that's only for the US. It's EPA Air Now, because while we can talk about the bigger picture, the most important thing is to make sure that each time you take a breath, you're not taking in toxins. And I first started focusing on this app, I think was it 2 years ago or was it 3 years ago? It's hard to remember now, when we here in the Washington, D.C. area had the worst air quality in decades, maybe ever. And thank you, Canada, because of the Canadian fires. A number of us were downloading apps and checking the air quality every day, and I still check it periodically. So EPA Air Now, there are others I'm sure as well, and I'm sure there are similar apps for Canada and other parts of the world. The fact that you may not be able to smell acrid smoke or whatever doesn't necessarily mean that the air is safe to breathe. And with that, let's go back to the eastern part of Canada again with Paul in Ottawa.
Yeah, so sorry for the bad air quality from the fires. I just want to point out that some of your worst air quality actually occurred for the July 4th celebrations and the 250th anniversary celebration because there was a huge fireworks display and there happened to be an inversion. So all of the ash and material chemicals from the fireworks got trapped at low levels. So air quality as measured by private groups, I believe, showed that they were 4 to 6 times higher than the safe level. So anybody with asthma or any health issues would have been suffering because of the massive, huge fireworks display. And I just wanted to point out another couple of websites that were great for climate information. And my favorite of all time is Earth Null School. That's NULL School. Great stuff. You have to play around with it a little bit to learn what it's showing, but just the jet streams are the 250 millibar pressure levels that you can select, and you can go back in time and pick dates, and you can go forward. There's projections going about a week out in time. So that's my favorite website of all for climate stuff. And then followed by Climate Reanalyzer, which also has great climate information. And you can depict various maps and look at all kinds of different parameters and also look at historical data. And I'll just reiterate Peter's comment on climate.us replacing climate.gov, which no longer exists. It's a fantastic site with detailed information. And I think I'll probably do a separate video on all of these sites that you and Peter and myself have mentioned, because it's just like, call it climate tools for the armchair climatologist, or climate tools for the public. So yeah, there's lots of ways to get good information. We do have to be very careful because we've lost a lot of different data sources because of what the US administration is doing, specifically on oceans and things like that. But luckily, there's other groups around the world. Anything coming from Potsdam Institute and the ERA, European Reanalysis, anything from those groups is top-notch data. And there are, fortunately, lots of data sources on ocean buoys, ocean moored array. A new Chinese drilling ship is also collecting all kinds of ocean data. So other countries are picking up on the slack for monitoring climate variables around the planet. So there's lots of stuff out there. So thanks.
And thanks for again enriching us still more with the kinds of data that's essential for all of us to follow in one way or another. Let's go back to Peter for your additional thoughts.
Of course, the source that I didn't mention is my very favorite one, obviously the IPCC 6 assessment. Now, they have a whole chapter on North America, and so it's full of the absolute 100% most reliable climate change information. I should just mention quickly Mexico, because Mexico is in North America and is a lot further south. Now, Mexico is getting 1 to 2 more months of hot weather. That is enormous. That's huge for a country closer to the equator like Mexico. But of course, a lot of this isn't getting reported now. We're getting less and less and less reported because of the climate that basically, I believe, the Trump administration has essentially caused us. Now, 46% of the United States is presently in drought, and that is increasing. It's projected to increase. So yet again, we're going to be looking at more than half of the United States under drought. And a lot of this is severe drought. When I say 46, that's all drought, but a lot of that is severe. That reminds me, and I want to remind you, that the southwest of the United States is in a mega drought. And that was first published in 2020, probably. But it is in a mega drought. It's going to continue, and it's the driest in 1,200 years. So United States, again, highly vulnerable to heat, highly vulnerable to drought. Now, I went to the IPCC and looked for their risk assessments that they do on United States agriculture, and I was actually horrified. At 1.37 that we're at now, United States agriculture is into the high risk zone. And at 2 degrees C, which we are condemned to by fossil fuel corporations and our own governments, United States agriculture is going to be widespread severe crop losses according to how the IPCC presents risks to us. And That's pretty useful. I just want to read to you the beginning of the IPCC North America report, which says it goes through the risks and then it says it's a very good report. Addressing risks in the United States have been made much more urgent by delays due to misinformation about climate science that has sowed uncertainty and impeded the recognition of risk. So the IPCC recognizes what's going on. We're trying to do our best to tell the truth to the people, no matter how terrible that truth is. So multiple lines of evidence. IPCC says that climate change is already contributing to more intense, more frequent extreme events, particularly heat waves across North America. Statistics show that record-setting hot temperatures in North America are occurring more and more often. The area burned by large wildfires in the western United States is increasing and has increased over the recent decades. So we are in a data trend now, a strong data trend, which is well established in the world and in North America, and particularly in the US. And so I have to repeat again, everything's getting worse and it's getting worse faster.
Thank you, Peter. One of the observations that is hardly original, but which I think about more and more these days, has to do with the concept of cognitive dissonance. When you've got two ideas that are contrary to each other, that sort of capture your imagination or facing you right there. And how do you deal with that? And I think for many of us here in the United States, and not just in the United States, certainly in many other countries, but the United States in particular, I mean, we have cognitive dissonance on steroids, if you want to sort of mix our metaphors like that. On the one hand, as Peter articulately and eloquently points out, and Paul, week after week, things are getting worse. It's right in front of us. We can't avoid it. If it's not happening in our town, it's happening 200 miles away, and next week it'll happen in our town. And no one can deny the cumulative impact. No one can deny that insurance companies are pulling out of places. No one can deny that a portion, maybe in some cases a significant portion of the inflation that we deal with results directly or indirectly from climate change. The migration that occurs results directly in part from climate change. And yet, not only do we have a government that acts, not only doesn't it exist, but that we need to do everything possible to accelerate climate change, not accelerate the response to climate change, who comes up with pockets of billions of dollars from who knows where to pay off companies to stop putting up wind turbines in the ocean and instead build coal plants. I mean, it's just beyond insanity. And how do you deal with that? Of course, we've talked in future and past programs with people like Margaret Klein Solomon and others about the psychology of all this. But that's what strikes me more and more, at least in the United States with our previous president, Biden, with Obama, with even going back to Bill Clinton, climate was on the radar, maybe not as much as some of us would have liked it to be, but there was no denying the reality of it. And now we're dealing with a kind of like in some kind of combination of a horror movie and a funhouse where we cannot even figure out what's real. And for the average American, not only are they hearing this nonsense from our president, but they're hearing it or not hearing anything from our news media. It's just another storm. It's just another record. No context whatsoever. Imagine if Peter Carter were invited to be on the news every night for 2 minutes, we would have a revolution in this country, right, Peter? I mean, but seriously, if somebody straight talking like yourself, and you've been talking about this and eloquently and passionately for decades now, we're in front of the American people. Not that information is everything, but it's sure an essential part of it. So all we can do here is urge you, the viewer, most of you who view this know some of this, some of it we hope is new today, but most importantly is to, as I've often tried to say, it's act. Act to protect your own family, your own home, your own neighborhood, but also act politically, economically to deal with what otherwise will be a situation that's almost unimaginable in the years to come. So with that, I want to thank you, Peter. I want to thank Paul today for highlighting some of the many dimensions of this, just the beginning of this summer's heat. I wouldn't call it an emergency yet, but it's getting pretty darn close. And by the time we get to the middle of the summer, we may be in a total emergency, depending upon how you define it. And of course, that's why we are the Climate Emergency Forum. And now, as we do every week, we will have the Climate three of the bigger stories of the past week in 1 minute or less. There's an entity in Cambridge, the UK, that's called Dawn. Dawn is not a woman or a man. Dawn is actually a supercomputer. It's a supercomputer that works on a lot of very important climate issues, including sea ice, because climate is so complicated. You need the most sophisticated, powerful computers. Well, Dawn went down because of the heat. I don't know if it's up as of now, but as of a couple of days ago, Dawn was having essentially the equivalent of heat stroke. And I only mention this in part to demonstrate what's often now called derailment risk, that we're beginning to see that our day-to-day lives, whether it's in business or ourselves, are often derailed by things we don't even anticipate. In this case, a supercomputer that works on climate that is, slapped down by a heat wave. Let's hope they can fix it, but it'll be something else tomorrow. That's story number one. Story number two, we've talked on this channel a lot, and we're one of the few channels that talk about it, and I'm proud of that, of stratospheric aerosol injection as a means of cooling the planet potentially rapidly and effectively. And I just wanted to mention, we've also talked a lot about the marine heat waves, these intense areas of oceans that are often thousands of miles in diameter, where temperatures can go up by as much as 10 degrees higher than what they were, killing billions of sea creatures and affecting weather everywhere. Well, there was a study showing that using what's called stratospheric aerosol injection, which is basically releasing sulfur or other particles in the atmosphere on the computer, this is not real life, this is a simulation, can reduce the extent of marine heat waves anywhere from 20 to 75% based upon this one simulation. That's nothing to take to the bank, but it shows the potential, if and when SAI, as it's called, ever gets implemented, to be able to address things that emission reductions can't address by itself, adaptation can't address. You need to directly cool the climate in addition to those other things. That's climate story number two. And climate story number three, I read that in Europe and in France, as a result of the heat waves, chickens are dying at extraordinary rates, basically from the heat, but also because the efforts, getting back to this idea of derailment risk, that farmers and others are trying to do to protect the chickens, like bringing in cooling units and electricity and whatever, are failing because of the heat themselves. So, in other words, even whether it's for people or for chickens or for anybody, the systems are collapsing all around us when we have these events that occur that are outside of basically the infrastructure and the biology that we evolved with. One thing in particular struck me where they said that because the modern broiler chicken basically grows in or develops in 5 weeks to this, mammoth chicken. Because of that, its metabolism has changed, so it's more sensitive to heat. And so it's not funny. I'm not laughing because there's anything funny about this, but essentially, because of our modern technologies, even changing how animals are grown and eaten, it makes them more sensitive to what is happening more and more. These are just examples of the kinds of things that are happening everywhere in the world and will happen, unfortunately, more intensively if and until the world gets its act together. As always, we look forward to seeing you next week. Thank you very much, and goodbye.